Dr. Shiva, he specializes in finding solutions through a biological engineering systems approach, or in very simple terms, what he does is eliminate the need for animal testing by replicating those same processes on the computer. Now, over the last weeks and months, Dr. Shiva has been focused on the science as well as the fake science and claims made by the World Health Organization, supported by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx, who are, now we're learning, have ties to the deep state, the Clinton Foundation, as well as the Gates Foundation. So it's clear to see now that their exaggerated pandemic projection numbers, which they have consistently lowered, okay, the original numbers, willfully promoted by the corporate-approved media, led to a panic-driven, disastrous global economic collapse. And today, we're happy to have him back to update us on his latest research and the real agenda that is being pushed through what he calls the greatest fraud on America to manipulate the economy, suppress dissent, and push mandated medicine. Dr. Shiva, welcome back to the show. Let's get straight into it. Bring us up to speed from when we spoke last and tell our audience about your latest findings.
Sure. Great to be here, Gary. I think there's two findings. What's going on, Gary, is we have the intersection of the issues of health and science along with politics. So it's a fascinating world we're in. And I feel, frankly, very, very honored to be able to share the knowledge that I was fortunately able to acquire through my education here in the United States and, growing up in Jersey, et cetera, which I've shared about before. But the key things are there's two events taking on. You have the political aspect, which, I talked about in that tweet. I think that tweet really brought up those three aspects, right? This entire fear-mongering is really the essence of it is to suppress dissent, right? The second part of it is to crash the economy, and the third part of it is to push mandated medicine, and I still stand by that. And what we've seen since that tweet came out is essentially, everyone's showing their cards. That's what's really happening. So let's talk about Fauci. Since we spoke, we ran a campaign to fire Fauci, and I frankly believe this individual should be indicted and should be fired, and all sorts of charges should be leveled at him because he's essentially been the mastermind of an organization for many, many years across many, many presidents, which has promoted a fake science that the immune system is so weak and that you always characterize some virus as a cause of destruction to the immune system. He did this with HIV and AIDS. And so this is his, probably second or third rodeo. And the goal here is to scare everyone with a fake science understanding that as though the immune system gets attacked by the virus, right? So one of the things we did was we called for his firing and his indictment, and I think close to 40,000 people in a few days signed that petition. I would say we probably have close to 2,000 doctors now, Gary, across the world, because the doctors themselves are recognizing that they are victims of a big pharma medical education system. Look, there are many doctors, some people I know, in related family who go into medicine, they have a noble cause to do it, but the reality is the entire medical education process is not an education process that is focused on teaching people how to heal themselves, right? It's not a process that teaches the physician how to treat the body as a system. It's not a process that teaches the physician how to use nutrition. As Hippocrates said, food is medicine. So all of that gets thrown out the window, and after they come out of medical school, what they are, unfortunately, is most of them are automatons. I'm not talking about the surgeons and the anesthesiologists. Those guys are like plumbers and electricians. They actually have to go in there and solve a problem. But fundamentally, the typical physician, they come out there as automatons. If this, do this. If this, do this. And they have golden handcuffs that if they don't do that, they're liable, and the boards own and control them. You could almost say they're, carbon-based automatons, okay? And at one point, it'll probably be easy to replace them. There's a growing movement of physicians who are recognizing that. Now, if you look at a guy like Fauci, I believe he's on the leadership council of the Gates Foundation. He loves the Clintons, and his relationship through the NIH and the CDC and the WHO is this triangle, which, by the way, the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese CDC is part of. The NIH of the United States funded, even as early as 2 or 3 years ago, $14 million to the Chinese CDC. So the entire cabal here is not about health. It's not about understanding how we boost people's immune systems. In many of the videos I put out, the immune system, from a very fundamental system standpoint, is our operating system. Above that, all the quote unquote apps run, right? If your operating system is dysfunctional, everything else falls apart and you get what we call disease. But fundamentally, the immune system is the guts of our health and well being. So in this entire discourse, that is not what Fauci's been talking about. That's not what the FDA's been talking about. That's not what the WHO's been talking about. That's not what the CDC's been talking about. In fact, you have the Gates, you have Zuckerberg, and you have the Clinton Global Initiative, who are all about vaccines, vaccines, vaccines. So their entire opportunity is, we talked about early, and the trajectory which I characterized early on is the entire purpose of this is to scare the Jesus out of everyone. So then, when next year comes, or even September, October of this year, when the flu season comes, people basically blindly say, yeah, chip me up. Yes, I'll accept the vaccine card. Yes, I'll have to get vaccinated before I get my driver's license. I'm willing to, show my little vaccine card before I go to the gym. Total control. And
well, what you're talking about is exactly what Bill Gates had brought up in a TED Talk just recently, where he spoke about having a digital certificate. And what's odd is that TED Talks actually edited out a critical sentence where he admitted that point. What are your thoughts on that biometric or that certificate?
I know the guy runs the TED Talks. The TED Talks will never have a guy like me on. It's basically, it's for your, basic people who the TED Talks at one time had a little more interest to them, but now they're very, very organized, very, very, in many ways engineered, right, to get a certain response. When you give these TED Talks, they make sure that you're following a particular script. So they basically can take anyone, put them through the TED Talk manufacturing engine, and you get a TED Talk out of it. But fundamentally, if you look at Bill Gates, first of all, he's not trained in anything in biological engineering. If you look at his history of innovation, he didn't create DOS. He actually bought it from someone, and then he sold it. And then he always was a little bit concerned that he never had good PR. So what he's done over the last 20 years is to try to recharacterize himself and build his legacy as the savior. The neo-missionary is going to go and help all the dark people in Africa and India, etc. Right? That's the way he's positioned himself. But the fundamental of the Gates Foundation or the Chan Zuckerberg Foundation or the Clinton Global Initiative is what they're fundamentally doing is they're taking vast amounts of public resources, which, by the way, they should be paying taxes on, and essentially evading taxes through very quote-unquote legal means to create these family foundations. And then they use amazing PR to tell all of us how great they are, how they're going to donate their money to these foundations, when what they're really building, Gary, is their own government, okay? It's their own government run by a 0.0001% of people, that they put their money there, they evade taxes, and then they're going to tell us what's good for us, right? They're going to determine policy through these extra governmental type organizations. That's what Gates, Zuckerberg, and the Clintons are involved in. Fauci's wired right into them, and then you have the WHO and the CDC. So if you look at that little graphic we put out with Fauci in the center, with those graphics, and obviously Big Pharma is a big part of their OS, the entire goal is to consolidate power. And what we've seen over the last unfortunate 3 months is it's a psychological exercise to see how much they can manipulate people so they concede power to them. That's what's fundamentally going on.
Now, President Trump indicated this week that, talking about when you pull back this big globalist scheme that's happening, and you talk about these different organizations, foundations, all coming together to create this sort of shadow government, if you will. Now, we're talking about also the World Health Organization. The president this week indicated that he was either putting a hold or looking at putting a hold on funding to the World Health Organization, stating that when they call every shot wrong, he said that's no good. So the president's taking a look at this because the World Health Organization calling the wrong shots. What's going on here? What are your thoughts?
Well, look, the World Health Organization, if you look at the organization, one of the big organizations that works with them closely is the it's an International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. I believe I don't know the exact acronym, IPFMA. Okay, that organization's executive, committee is led by Eli Lilly. It's led by Shinogi, one of the big Japanese pharmaceutical companies, and Roche. All of which Roche's stock has gone up as recently because of their announcement that they're going to come up with some vaccine. But you basically have, as we talked about last time, the utopia of the Sustainable Development Goals, that they promoted this utopia about 3 years ago, that we're going to have this amazing world where there's going to be income inequality, there's not going to be any poverty, etc. And the way we get to that utopia is through vaccinating everyone. It's called No One Will Be Left Behind. It's the title on the cover, through their IA 2030, Immunization 2030. So the goal is, and by the way, this is classic pharma. You promote a major problem, the fear that everyone's going to die from infectious disease, and then you promote their solution, which is we can get to this utopia. And the way we get there to those 17 Sustainable Development Goals is through vaccinating everyone. So this is out in black and white or color, whatever format you want to read it. And the institutions behind this are the WHO, the CDC, Big Pharma, Gates, Chan Zuckerberg, the Clinton Global Initiative, and essentially Fauci's their front man. So since we last spoke, we've been hammering on that. We've put out a call to fire Fauci. 40,000 people have now signed up, which really shows, and this is global, people are not stupid. By the way, in the same time, Gary, Fauci had his fans put out a petition so he could become the sexiest man alive on People magazine.
Oh my goodness.
In 10 days, he only had about 10,000 votes. In 2 days, 40,000 people signed up for this petition. People are not stupid. I think what people have wanted is, their gut instincts get something's wrong. And I think the videos we've been sharing, putting out there, are giving people the technical base to understand why. And one of those technical bases is, what is the immune system? So since we last spoke, we've put out a number of much more detailed videos on how the immune system works, but particularly using Cytosolve, we've started looking at what we call mechanisms of action to further give people some knowledge and education on how these mechanisms work. So for example, we did a very powerful educational training session on how vitamin D works. And before I go there, one of the things we want to understand is, in this entire discourse, at the senior-most levels across mainstream media, be it Tucker Carlson or wherever the hell it is, right? By the way, Tucker is basically following what we're saying, right? Since we did our videos, now he's saying he's against Fauci, okay? But he basically is an opportunist. The mainstream media, they just want eyeballs, so they see, which way, Shiva's getting a lot of views here, let's follow that, because they don't want to lose their Trump audience, okay? But it's not about anything sincere. But the reality, what we see is that none of them will ever talk about the power of vitamin D, or the power of vitamin A, or the power of vitamin C. And God forbid they'll ever talk about immune health. How do you juice up the immune system? Because that core foundational understanding, which is the real science, is that we live in a sea of microbes. I mean, there's 30 trillion microbes inside of me. There's 30 trillion viruses. There's about 60 trillion bacteria among my only 6 trillion cells. I'm a germ farm, okay? And around me is a germ farm. But I'm not dying. You're not dying. Most people don't die. The people that do die are the people who have a compromised immune system, have a significantly compromised immune system. Now, that happens naturally as people age, the elderly, and there's things that they can do to boost up their immune system. It happens to those who don't take care of their health. It happens to those who have pre-existing conditions, and we've talked about it. In the letter I wrote to the president, I laid out, a very clear understanding of 4 different of these groups: people who have COVID-19, the people who are immunosuppressed, the people who are in critical care, and the healthy people. And I proposed a way that how you, in a personalized way, support those people with vitamin D and vitamin A and vitamin C and iodine, and you get the economy back to work. There's no reason to do this quarantining and this quote-unquote flattening the curve and social distancing as the only way to solve it. But however, what you have Fauci doing and what you have the mainstream media doing is they're going to promote this narrative that First of all, remember their numbers were like millions of people dying. Then it went to hundreds of
Right,
thousands.
and I want to bring that up because as each day goes by, the original pandemic numbers are dramatically cut. Now, is this because their projections were way off, or because their mitigation strategies were effective?
Well, I would argue it was a lot of people are watching our videos, millions of people, they're probably taking vitamin D and A and et cetera, okay? If you really want to understand. But the more, I think that the reality is that if you look at it broadly, there's a couple of things going on here. First of all, there's a massive propaganda campaign. The goal is to say in June, let's give Fauci the Nobel Prize in Medicine, and Briggs, or whatever her name is, they're the ones who convinced the president to do social distancing. They're the ones who did quarantining, and we flattened the curve and we won. And by the way, the vaccine's here, okay? That's the propaganda model that they're doing. The reality is the sun's going to come out in a couple of months, pretty strong, okay? Vitamin D. That's what the reality is going to be, but that will be shoved under the rug. The reality is their numbers are not making any sense, and they're cooking the books. So how are they cooking the books? They're doing two things. First of all, they're taking the WHO is the organization that creates what are called the diagnostic codes. In the United States, the AMA creates what's called the procedural codes. So if you go into a doctor's office and they assess you, the diagnostic codes are coming from the WHO. Actual codes on what your diagnosis is. So what the WHO recommended was they would have two codes. One code would be you actually were diagnosed with COVID. You got the antibody test, or you did the PCR test, which by the way has a lot of false positives, and you have COVID positively. The other one it was a very fluffy code, which is, well, it sort of feels and looks like COVID. We see some, shortness of breath, or they're coughing, whatever that is. So those two codes in a letter, which I was able to, someone shared with me, a senior official at a hospital, a pediatrician, and the CDC sent a letter out about a couple of weeks ago to hospital administrators all over the country, telling them to purposefully merge those codes, okay? What that means is you come in, I give you an example. One of our friends, her husband was a smoker for 20 to 30 years. Always, whenever flu season came, he's an elderly gentleman in his late 70s. He was going to the hospital and getting intubated, etc., with pneumonia. Well, this time, same thing occurs. He goes in. Guess what? If anything happens to him, Gary, they're going to give him that COVID-19 label. No one will remember the fact he was a smoker, that he had horrible health, etc. That will all be forgotten. And the hospital administrators are being encouraged to anything that looks or feels or smells like that symptom, which is the second code, to put it into the first code. In fact, a number of my friends are physicians. Even after someone dies, the physicians are being told to say, well, did he have COVID-like symptoms? Even though the test doesn't come back, sometimes it takes 14 days, they're putting COVID-19 into the diagnosis systems.
So let me ask you this. Is this because they had such high projected numbers, 100, 200,000 deaths, so many people infected, that they're reaching into every single medical diagnosis of someone dying, and then they're applying COVID-19 so that they can inflate these numbers, so that when they look back, they're going to go, when we come back out of this thing, we all look back and go, wait a minute, oh, look at those numbers. Yeah, we were right. But they're inflating them. Do you believe that to be true?
Yeah, they are. If you are using these codes and you're giving people not a definitive metric, it's a very easy opportunity to, manipulate those numbers. And you have to understand, there's a whole incentive process. In hospitals, the hospital administrators run these organizations, and they have to deliver profit. That's how they're measured. The hospital administrators, remember, there are people called GPOs and PBMs, group purchasing organizations, and PBMs, who drive all the supply chain into those hospitals, who are the middlemen. So there are incentives for tagging certain protocols, certain diagnosis, and most of that is so opaque, a lot of us can't even get access to that. But what I'm trying to say, Gary, there's an incentive under conditions by the hospital administrators to put, things as COVID-19. Separate, and by the way, one of the things that people need to understand is you're seeing, remember this, we're still in flu season, right? There's people, tens of thousands of people are dying of the flu. Well, guess what? The flu numbers are going down, okay? Interestingly, proportionately. So we're basically, I would argue, we need to do an investigation. We're cannibalizing from those flu numbers to beef up the COVID-19 numbers.
So what you're saying is they are in fact taking from other diagnoses. So if you have the flu, now the flu numbers are going down because everyone's going over to the COVID-19 numbers.
Yeah, because there is an actual code.
Wow.
And there are two codes. They made a fluffy code version of it and a real code version of it. To give you an idea, in Italy, 38, 40% of the people are over the age of 65. Guy comes in with a chest pain, COVID-19, okay? So that's one of the important things that we have to understand, that the books are being cooked because they need the narrative that, remember, the big game here is not now, it's 6 months from now, 9 months from now. We must have mandatory vaccines, and pharma is our gateway to all solutions. So I'd like to...
Go ahead.
I'd like to, having said that, talk about some of those categories and really enlighten people into the reality of how these people don't give a damn about people's lives. So let's talk about the critically ill. So, I did a video yesterday really sharing how the alveolus works, right? So let's remember there's 4 groups. Someone who just has a COVID, someone, they've decided they have COVID-19, right? Antibody test or the PCR test. That's one group. There's another group of the immunocompromised, but there's even a more important group that we're right in the hospitals right now. Which are those people? Those are the people that are critically ill, Gary. Critically ill. And if you saw the U.S. News report that came out yesterday, they said most of those people on ventilators, which means most meaning 95%, are going to die. Okay? So why? The reality is, let's go back to fundamental science, which Gates Foundation is not talking about, which Fauci's not talking about, and in fact, the pharma sharks swimming around Trump are not talking about. Let's go to very, very simple physics. So these people who are critically ill, well, how do they get there? Well, first principles, they have compromised immune systems 99% of the time. All right? Something happened to their immune system, and guess what happens? If you remember, if you're not firing on all 6 cylinders or 8 cylinders of the immune system, one cylinder overreacts, which is the cytokine storm. Your macrophages aren't doing their job. Your T cells aren't doing their job. They're compromised. So you have TNF alpha, IL-1 beta. Just to keep it simple, these are cytokines. It's another artillery or another machinery that overreacts, and it starts attacking your own lung tissue. All right? I hope that's clear. So that overreaction takes place. Well, that's called a cytokine storm. So if you take the bubble of the alveolus, I'm looking at one little beautiful balloon in the lungs where air comes in, oxygen, your capillaries exchange that oxygen, the CO2 for oxygen, and then you get fresh blood flowing into your body, right? That gas exchange is occurring in that alveolus. Well, guess what happens when you have a cytokine storm? That poor little alveolus, which is a beautiful little alveolus, starts filling up with edema, which, think about it's filling up with fluid. All right? Now, you put people on a ventilator. So just think about it. You got a little balloon here filled with water, okay, half water. If you go to basic physics, people don't remember, there's a law called Boyle's law. Pressure is inversely proportional to volume, okay? So if you reduce the volume, what goes up? Pressure goes up, right? So now you're taking people and you're putting them on these ventilators, high pressure ventilators. When their body is already undergoing a cytokine storm, it's being filled up with fluid. And what are you doing? You're setting more high pressure in there. And fundamentally what's happening is you're exacerbating this cytokine storm. You're causing more damage. You're literally popping off iron groups. Iron, every red blood cell has hemoglobin groups, hemoglobin attached to iron, and you're oxidizing, you're creating further what's called oxidative stress. I'll be doing a video discussing this more, but fundamentally these ventilators are killing people, particularly the critically ill, but it's a monetary, huge economic opportunity for the hospital administrators. Every ventilator they get in, Gary, is money, right? Now they created high demand, higher price. Simple solution, and this is what's criminal. Vitamin C, IV vitamin C. And what I'm talking about is not even, medical advice. People should just go in the literature hundreds of papers, hundreds of systematic reviews. Even JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is really a peer-reviewed journal for big pharma, even they conservatively admit that when you give IV vitamin C, and you have to give it in high dosage so it has a therapeutic effect, even at the lowest levels, 15 to 30 milligrams, every 6 hours, grams basically every 6 hours. In my letter to the president, I said we should give about 100 grams to have that therapeutic effect over, 24 hours. Amazing effect, because what does vitamin C do? Vitamin C really has 3 properties, okay? It's a powerful anti-inflammatory. It's a powerful antioxidant. In that, in that unfortunate cytokine storm, a lot of oxidative species are being created. And you know what vitamin C does? It goes and eats them all up. It also modulates the immune system. It has an amazing power to go modulate chemical processes at the cellular level, so it stops that cytokine storm. So it's stopping the cytokine storm. It's taking out the reactive oxygen species, which oxidize the system. And furthermore, it's an antiviral. It's an antiviral, Gary. It actually stops RNA replication, and the transport of the virus out. So why aren't we doing this? This is a question everyone listening to this broadcast should be thinking. What is going on in this country?
Well, does this take us back to the Gates Foundation, to the push for vaccines?
Yeah, because they don't want people being healed. Everything has to be the V in vaccine, not the V in vitamins, right? They want the V in vaccines because the entire goal here is to mandate vaccines. And why is that important? Why is that fundamentally important? I wrote a book that's up there called The Future of Email. I created the first email systems I talked about when I was a kid. Many years later, I also created a technology to analyze email and route it to solve the issue of email management. So many of the biggest corporations in the world, Gary, use my technology to watch what people are saying, understand them, and then market to them, right? But one of the things I learned was technologies like this can be used for observability and controllability. With companies like Amazon, with 200 million cameras China has out there, we want to use 5G to make this a surveillance state completely. We have the ability to gather lots of data, which is the observation. Okay, here are the dissenters. These are the troublemakers over here, right? These are the people who fall in line. And then you have the ability, so now you know what the target groups are, what marketing does, right? These are the older people. These are the younger women. I'll sell them this kind of purse, that kind of purse. That same technology can be used to send out to control people. Well, the larger goal here is to create a large-scale factory of automatons. And I think the elites are thinking this, well, do I replace this with silicon-based robots? They're easily controllable, right? Program them and eliminate large parts of the population. Or they probably did a recalculation. Wow, silicon-based robots, that's very expensive, okay? Why don't I take my carbon-based creatures and automate them? You see what I'm saying?
Wow.
Control them. Well, one of the important ways to control them is you must control the bloodstream. You must control our health because it's a last oasis of what we have. So as a part of doing that is, remember, it's controllability, and observability. Once you can do that, with all the amazing technologies that exist today, massive ability to do massive supercomputers which can do calculations, computers which can do control systems, to manipulate what you see, what you get. You have an amazing, or the state has an amazing opportunity to make trillions by deciding, oh, Gary likes this, on the mundane level. Gary likes, to eat hamburgers. Let me sell him some buns, right? Or if you go in, many of the marketing organizations know this. If a guy goes to buy diapers, if they always put beer next to it because guys always like to pick up the beer. P&G and companies like Information Resources, I used to be in the data analytics space, know this, okay? So the fundamental goal is to create a monolithic top-down system, aka China, right? State capitalism, crony capitalism, top-down, not entrepreneurial innovation coming from bottoms up. Consolidate science, consolidate innovation, consolidate health into one imperial global state. That's what the foundation of what's going on right now.
Wow.
And so this process is a vehicle to get there. So therefore, they cannot ever talk about vitamins. They
Dr.
cannot
Fauci,
ever talk about things that are pennies.
This is incredible stuff here, and we really want this information to get out on a very, very wide wide scale. And we do rely on our viewers to share this message because the mainstream media is doing their best to cover it up. So everyone watching right now, please share this link out to your various social media platforms. Tweet this link at Real Donald Trump to the president himself using the hashtag expose WHO, expose Bill Gates. Very important. Now, before you go, Dr. Fauci, we want to remind our viewers that
Dr.
you are
Shiva.
I called you Dr. Fauci. Dr. Shiva, before you go, we do want to remind our viewers that you are running for a Senate seat in Massachusetts on the platform of Truth, Freedom, and Health. So all of our viewers, if you would like to support Dr. Shiva, we encourage you to go to the website shiva4senate.com. That's Shiva with the number 4 and Senate. Okay, it's on the screen and it will be in the description along with all of the links to the rest of Dr. Shiva's social media platforms. Thank you so much for joining us. A wealth of information. And we want to have you back on again with an update. So I know you've got a very busy schedule ahead of you, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. We look forward to having you back.
Gary, one thing, if we have 1 minute left, one of the most important things that we get on the ballot, the GOP establishment and the Democrat establishment does not want to get on the ballot. So everyone listening out there, if you go to the website Shiva for Senate and you scroll down, you'll see a link there which says to get me on the ballot. Because of all this COVID stuff, Gary, it's very difficult to collect signatures. So what we're doing is, if you know people in Massachusetts or you're from Massachusetts, click on that link right there. And if you click on it, put in your name, your address, etc., and we will mail you. It's very expensive for us, all the forms and all the stamps, so you can submit your signature to your town hall. We need this done in the next 10 days. So everyone go out there. We need another 7,000 signatures. So we need everyone to click. Tell all your friends in Massachusetts that you have someone who's one of you running for office, who wants to win for you truth, freedom, and health. We need everyday working people, Gary, presenting us. People actually solve problems. So we need to get on the ballot. Both of the establishments are so afraid, Gary. So the way we fight back is to get me on the ballot. So everyone go there. Tell your friends who are in Massachusetts to go there right now. Fill that up, and we will mail them. We have our volunteers who will mail them a form so they can sign easily at the comfort of their own home, given this quarantine, and send it to their town halls. We make it really simple, but they just need to click there and fill out the form.
Absolutely wonderful. Dr. Shiva, thank you so much for joining me here on the Next News Network. Of course, we look forward to having you back for another update. And friends watching at home right now, hit the share link, leave your comments below, and let's make this viral. We'll see you at the next report for the Next News Network. I'm Gary Franchi.
You possess the power to impact the global narrative. Please share this report, and to get more videos like this, become a Next News subscriber by clicking the link below. Thank you for watching the Next News Network.
Thanks for watching the Next News Network. Tap here to subscribe to the channel to get the latest news and alerts. Tap here to watch our latest breaking news and our top stories. Tap here for our latest featured interviews. And make sure you tap here to get in on the new podcast, the G-Cast, with my wife Angie and I. We'll see you at the next report for the Next News Network.
Was there a cover-up? From the wet market all the way to government, a shocking story. When it really began.
The authorities in Wuhan haven't been honest with the world.
There has been cover-up.
A Sky News Australia special.
More than 50,000 people are dead and thousands more are fighting for their lives. COVID-19 is a near unstoppable killer. The virus has ravaged nations, devastated economies, turned bustling cities into ghost towns. No nation has escaped its destructive grip, and it appears the worst may be yet to come. But could all of this have been avoided? Could the coronavirus pandemic, which has upended all our lives, have been prevented? Tonight, Sky News can reveal new information which suggests Chinese authorities knew about the virus much earlier than they've admitted. Those inside China tell us this information was deliberately withheld. That the communist government is continuing to lie about the coronavirus's impact, and that the deaths of thousands of people may have been covered up. We'll also take you around the world and hear from experts and those living in the COVID-19 hotspots to explore how the nations most affected responded to the pandemic. What's worked, what's failed, what's likely to happen next, and how we win this global war. Factories are back up and running, and construction workers are back on site. Life, it seems, is returning to normal at the birthplace of COVID-19. The lockdown of Wuhan in China has been loosened. It'll be lifted on Wednesday, and authorities there are celebrating what they see as their successful battle against the deadly virus. But we're now learning just how irresponsible they've been. The cover-ups and the apparent disregard for human life, which may have led to the deaths of thousands of people.
We could have been better off if China had been more forthcoming.
The virus, now known as COVID-19, was believed to have originated in this Wuhan exotic animal market, transmitted from a bat to a human. It spread like wildfire. Hundreds were infected within days. Doctors who tried to alert authorities were harassed and ignored. Some have even disappeared. The Chinese government claims the first coronavirus case was identified around December 31. But official documents indicate that's an outright lie.
From the classified government record that we've seen, what we have found is that there are actually cases in November.
Investigative reporter Josephine Ma says the classified documents she's seen state Chinese authorities knew of a case of an infected 55-year-old from Hubei province on November 17. That's 6.5 weeks before Chinese Communist Party leaders alerted the World Health Organization. During that time, hundreds were infected.
Before 20th of January, there was like cover up, of course. From the information we saw, like in 2019, there were already like over 200 cases.
The infamous lockdown of Wuhan then came much too late. The horse had already bolted. The virus surely would have spread beyond the city of 11 million and likely beyond China's borders.
From my research, there was actually 5 million people in the Wuhan area where the center of the outbreak was that had left in the 2 weeks before the lockdown there. So if you think about those 5 million people, they have gone all around the world and they have just spread the illness.
And residents of Wuhan say there's another cover-up going on. The government claims around 2,500 have died here. But records of hundreds of deaths may have been kept secret. Wuhan social media users say all 7 of the city's funeral homes have been delivering hundreds of urns each day.
One Chinese media report talked to a truck driver, and that driver said he has delivered 5,000 urns to that funeral home, and that is one of the 8